second session of the day. Sam Farhi is here, and we are talking about practical tips to make micro-learning effective. I know this is what I'm looking forward to, because there's always that balancing act, isn't there? How much do you cut away before it stops actually doing what you need it to do? So without further ado, I will get off the screen and hand over to you, Sam. It's all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my name's Sam Farhi. I'm lead instructional designer over at EdApp, and we're a microlearning tool and LMS. But today, really, what I wanted to do is just share tips on, in my experience, what makes microlearning effective. So I'm not going to try to sell anything to you or even microlearning to you. This is for people that want to do microlearning. Here's what I found in the past over 2 years of exclusively making microlearning lessons. So I have 10 tips. Really, it could have kept going, but I thought 10 was a round number. We'll stop it right there. And we'll have some sort of room for questions at the end. Okay, so I'm going to share my slides here. Okay. So I think the first thing about microlearning that's really important is kind of the definition of it. And just like a lot of things in L&D, even instructional design itself, the term, it's in flux of what is that definition. The way that we're going to define it today are just very short lessons that are around 3 to 5 minutes. And by lessons, I mean like a chunk of learning that only takes about 3 or 5 minutes to do before you quit out or it says complete. And that's kind of the definition we're going to use. But there are many different definitions of microlearning. I think that even a short video on YouTube that teaches you how to do a task in a few minutes could be considered a form of microlearning. And it's not exactly what I've been doing for the past 2 years, but that's totally a legit name for it. And it has a lot of the same fundamentals as the sorts of lessons that I've been making over at EdApp. Now, microlearning is usually sharp. It gets to the point quickly. It should be very concise, just sort of like what I like to tell IDs is that there is a lot of value in kind of studying wider than the instructional design books and literature. Other things can help and inform your instructional design, including the what I like is the D&AD copywriting book, which is about advertising. It's kind of the science of just do it for Nike, or many different slogans and things like that, and how can you convey a message in the shortest amount of words possible. So here's a tip number 11, I would say, for instructional design is it's a funky profession that a lot of other wider reading can inform. So another book is Wabi Sabi, The Art of Design. So that's what I say. And it's ironic we're talking about getting to the point quickly, and I'm taking a long time to get to the point. So let's keep going. So this is Lydia Davis, an experimental short story writer. And I'm showing her right now because when I describe microlearning to people, I really use her as a reference. Some people are more literary than others, so I'll break it down for you. And that was a joke. She has a book called Break It Down. But this is one of Lydia Davis's short stories. This is Tropical Storm. Like a tropical storm, I too may one day become better organized. Now, she has many stories that would last about a page. And if you're not familiar with Lydia Davis, I definitely recommend Lydia Davis. She's very influential in terms of the world of fiction. But what also happens with Lydia Davis is that when you read a short story, or you could liken it to a novel that has a lot of short chapters, there's a sense of completion right away. And as opposed to something like Crime and Punishment, the Dostoevsky novel, where each chapter is about 100 pages. If you have a book with short chapters, you might finish it in that day. You might go, oh, that was pretty short. I think I have time for another one. Oh, that was pretty short. I think I have time for another one. And before you know it, you could finish that book in that day. I don't know if any of you have had that experience where you have a book with short chapters, just something about it that seems to go a little bit faster. And what I propose to you in my unscientific evidence is that it just feels like you are getting ahead. It feels like you are having senses of completion and consistently. And there's that thing, that Facebook manipulates, the dopamine hit. And I think that's also what's happening when you have a Lydia Davis story, or you have a book with very short chapters in it. You're going to get to that end a little bit quicker, and maybe even a little bit breezier. And that's the idea behind micro learning. So first tip, keep it short. Uh, Instructional design tends to have this bad reputation because workplace training, if it's in this kind of big chunk, like let's say it's 2-3 hours, you have to do it every quarter, every year even. People dread it, and they go, oh, just something I have to do in addition to the work I already have to do. Everyone's learning the same thing, and I'm just going to do this at the last possible second. There's a lot of procrastination. And for a while, people have groaned at workplace training. And I think we can just put that out there. So the idea for micro learning is, let's keep it short. Let's make it so that you feel like, oh, I just did that lesson, took 2 seconds. Maybe I can do the next lesson. Maybe I have time for another one. And so that's the idea of it. So instead of saying, okay, let's cut out things, let's teach less, it's more about teaching less at a time. Okay, so it's saying, okay, here's a very precise objective. We're going to focus on that objective and move on to the next. Okay, so in EdApp, when we first started and we were creating micro lessons, we found a kind of a sweet spot in terms of slide count and completion rates. And that spot was around 8 to 12 slides per lesson. And when they were that short, and not much shorter, but enough that you can learn something, the completion rates were just extremely high. 100% completion rates at times. When it started to get longer than that, the completion rates fell off. And so if there's if that's an issue for you in your work, on the LMS side of things, and completion rates aren't there, microlearning might be a solution to that. Again, I'm not here to sell you on this, but we did find that there was a direct correlation. Now, keeping it short also allows for you to control the frequency. So that's a big deal. So instead of that long training that you're getting once a year or once a quarter, or you might get a big training and there's a lot of different lessons. You see all the lessons at once that you're going to have to take. It's like looking at Mount Everest for some people. So controlling the frequency is part of this. So what we found is that a lesson a day is a really good frequency to have, much like Wordle. The sensation, I don't know if any of you tried Wordle, but what Wordle does is it's a word puzzle game that's very much like the Mastermind board game. And what happens is people started to pick up on it. The New York Times just bought it for a few $1 million, which I think was a steal. But basically, they only allow one word a day. You can only do one word a day. You can't keep playing the game. Once you finish the game, which takes about 3 to 5 minutes, I would say, that's it. And you have to wait for the next day. And what that did was it created conversation between people going, "Oh, did you get the word today?" And what that can do in terms of micro learning is it, instead of this asynchronous, completely asynchronous model, there's somewhat of a synchronicity to it. That if you can control the frequency of when a lesson is released to the learners and they're all getting it at the same time, it's much more likely there's going to be pointed conversation about those particular topics. And we found that to be true. We started to put in discussion boards and things like that, and we found that was true. Um, so yeah, so keeping it frequent, about a lesson a day is that kind of sweet spot of frequency, but it can be even less frequent, maybe once every 2 days, have a little bit new training. And instead of front loading or back loading your quarter with these huge chunks of time that you have to put towards the learning, what it does is it creates a continuous culture of learning. And we'll talk about that next, because the next thing is to form a habit, but not in a bad way. What I mean is to create really a culture of continual learning, so that you're constantly have something new on the plate. There's something fresh. So instead of having that hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours of chunk, if you divvy that out about 5 minutes at a time, it's just going to stay much more fresh. You can keep the rest in the freezer. You're not losing any of the information, but you're parsing it out just a little bit at a time. Now, that also means putting restrictions in the right areas. And I don't mean to talk about our learners like they're lab rats. That's of any sort. That's not what I mean. But putting the right barrier can accelerate that habit. And one of those barriers is to not show everything that you're going to be learning at once. So don't show Mount Everest. That can be hard for them to climb, where there's tons of lessons that they have to do eventually, and it unlocks every day. That's not the way to do it. But to say, "Oh, you have a new thing today." You have a new thing today, and to kind of make that part of the habit of checking your Instagram and your email, and then checking what learnings you have. So in whatever way that you deliver that, parsing it out just a little bit at a time is the way to go. Putting too much in there, in terms of even just how much you're going to do, can be very, very stifling and intimidating. And this will also come in later when I discuss agility. Okay, this one is a very practical tip. What I found is that when you have clever titles, or you found that pun of what you're going to be learning, it's not that helpful. Titles should be referential. And what I mean, and I was looking for the right word for this, because I believe that if a poem or a novel is referential, it means it alludes to Greek myths and things like that. But what I mean is that it's referenceable. And apparently that's not a real word, but titles should be referenceable. Okay, they should be boringly specific, and they should favor utility over cleverness. Okay, and that's so simple, but why is that? That is so that learners can actually go back and take training again. So if they get to something that's in their workplace and they go, "Oh, I forget what that was about," they can actually go back to their modules and check it out again. And it's so short and not burdensome that they actually do it. And we found that learners take lessons more than once, which is kind of just an amazing thing in instructional design if that ever happens, because obviously this is obligatory and all those things, but it can actually be a reference of material that they need. And to make the titles of lessons so that they can access it without having to wade through a big slide deck or scroll through a very long module, they can click very quickly and see the information that they need. So utility is greater than cleverness when using micro lessons. And you can just picture it yourself. If you imagine just seeing a page of lessons that have very specific titles, you can really press Apple F or Command F, search for what you want, and go to it. That's a really, really important part, and it allows for users to keep that information that they need at top of mind. Now, another thing this means, though, is that if those titles are very boringly specific and they're referential, it means that their objectives are also specific. Their objectives should be small. They shouldn't be, these kind of large objectives. Learn how to be a leader is not the objective of that particular lesson. It's something very, very, learn how to have a difficult conversation. It's something much smaller. I mean, that's still a big one, but something much smaller. So the titles is the outline, but also it should reflect a very focused and specific objective. Okay. Next is obliterate the forgetting curve. Okay, so what is the forgetting curve? I'm not a scientist. This could be pseudoscience. I heard it was not, but let's take a look at what it is. So the forgetting curve says 50% of new information is forgotten within the first hour, and 70% is lost within 24 hours of completion of the training. And there's a curve. Do you see the memory part, that red line? And that's what it kind of looks like. And we don't have to go into the history of what is the forgetting curve, but really I just want to kind of show you what this line looks like. So you can see at the bottom on the x-axis, there's an elapsed time about of days. You see that line really drops by day 2 and drops even a little bit further and kind of levels out around day 6. With micro learning, because you have that frequency, that curve is going to look very different. It's not going to just be you learn that thing once and then by day 30 you forgot it. It's going to be like you learned it on day 1, and then there's going to be another peak on day 2 and another peak on day 3 and another peak on day 4. Okay, so it's going to look much more spiky of a graph. And if you can plan it right, building on information. So, lesson 2 mentions something in lesson 1. It recalls something in lesson 1. It doesn't need to reteach things in lesson 1. You can even just mention a term from lesson 1. You're going to really change what that curve looks like. And so that's a really powerful thing. Yeah, so and that's also going to depend on how what you're teaching, what's in the training. But even, just mentioning some key words from the lesson that came before is going to reset recall. It's going to help with that retention, and it also does reinforcement. So one of the biggest, I think, criticisms of microlearning is, how do you learn anything in such a short amount of time? And really the answer to that is we have reinforcements as much as we can. We sneak them in, we reword things, we have them in interactions, and all of those things. So so that we're really focused on reinforcements. Okay, number 6, keep it fun. Keep it fun. There's something about micro learning, and it's not just the deliverability. It's not just how it's delivered. We tend to be mobile based micro learning. It's on the phone or it's on an iPad, but it tends to work best when it's fun. We know that research shows that having fun while learning helps retention. That's true. You can Google that if you'd like, but you can also just think about on your own life. What are the things that you remember? Do you remember the really boring classroom staring at your desk, or do you remember when your teacher said, "Let's do this activity"? So there's a real yeah, there's real significance in fun. Okay, also because you are making this learning micro, you're going to be fit into people's lives in a different way. So if a module is out 2 hours long, they have to really carve that out, stop what they're doing. But if it's a micro lesson, something, even a short video, it's something that's going to make its way into the lunch hour or on the commute or in between doing tasks. It's going to be very much more on the ground. So having some fun with it is good for engagement, and people are going to want to open it up. So if that means loosening up the language a little bit, micro learning with very high academic language might not be the best choice. And if you're using text in your micro learning, like I usually do, make it as conversational as possible. It should be able to be read aloud and sound like a person speaking. One of the things we lose in asynchronous learning is that in-person touch, and it's not just about like response, because when you're in a classroom, I mean, I usually raise my hand all the time, but not everybody does. It's not necessarily that. It's also just the conversational aspect of the classroom, and being there to kind of lead our learners from point A to B and allow them to make discoveries and just to seem a little bit more human. And that's kind of what the idea of micro learning is there. Okay. And I mentioned this before, but tip number 7 is to keep it agile. And what I mean by that is it should be flexible. And flexibility is a strength of microlearning. So instead of releasing, here's the 2-hour module, and we'll get a survey at the end, next year it'll be different. You can really start talking to people immediately and getting feedback immediately, seeing what is working, what people found helpful, what they did not find helpful. And because the learning is spaced, you have an opportunity to edit the rest. If something's not working in lesson 1, lesson 2 doesn't have to have that same mistake. So and so on and so forth. So keeping it agile and being able to change things according to feedback and responding to that kind of feedback very quickly is a big strength of microlearning. The next thing is knowing your audience, because you will be a part of their daily life. And so this really struck home with me when we started to do, we were working with making security courses. And we started off going, okay, security guards, they're going to be, these young hot shots that, are like John Wick. And it goes, actually, that's really not true. We took the time to look up, just Google it, security guard demographic. And what we found is that 30% of security guards are women. Okay. The average age of security guards is 44 years old. The average salary of security guards is not enough to live, is in the poverty realm of whatever city that they're in. And most of them are in New York City and Chicago. You go, whoa, that changes completely what our preconceived notions of security guards were from a demographic standpoint. And because we're such a part of their daily life and integrated into their daily life, it was very important for us to know that from a socioeconomic level. On a micro level, what we do is we search for day in the life of a security guard. And there was a great post on Reddit where a security guard was saying, here's what really my day looks like. it's boring. But he said, this is what I do when I start. This is what I do next. This is what I do next. This part's kind of boring. Sometimes this happens, you know, and we really got a micro anecdotal story without being able to speak to a security guard. We didn't have that luxury, I think, of a subject matter expert, and we feel privileged when we have those things. But we didn't have that, so we just Googled it. And on Reddit, there was a really great story. And what that informed for our micro learning was, okay, so let's really focus on giving the profession respect. Let's give it a lot of purpose. Let's acknowledge that there's risk there, and let's maybe not make it so focused on games and all these things. Let's really think about who our audience is, and what they're going to connect to. Okay, so that was a really big deal, and I think it's especially big in micro learning because it's so small that it does fit as part of the daily life. Okay. Another thing is allow for conversations. So in asynchronous learning, another big criticism of it is that there's no feedback. But somehow to have some sort of way, whatever the way you're delivering it. And now in EdApp, we have, discussion boards and assignments and social learning. If you don't have that in the way that you're delivering the micro learning, figure it out. Having a place where there are comments is really important, or even in the module itself, asking for reflection or asking about an experience is really, really important for learners, and as we know, adult learners especially. Even if the admin cannot read the hundreds of responses of a reflection on the material or an experience that that learner had, it still feels good from the learner's perspective to press submit on a comment or a story that they typed out or something that they recorded, etc., etc. It still gives voice to the learner. So that's a huge tip right there. I'm almost running out of time. I'm like kind of perfect because number 10 is use real world scenarios. And that's not just micro learning, right? We say that in instructional design is very popular. But the thing is with micro learning that's a little bit different is because you become part of the daily life. You're tested much more on these things. Your myths will be dispelled quickly. If you have a scenario and then someone looks up from their desk and that's not what their desk looks like, that myth will get dispelled. So keeping those scenarios real, and part of it is knowing your audience, knowing what the job actually looks like. That's really important in micro learning. So those are my 10 tips. And Tom, if you want to take off the slide, so I do not have an exit slide.
Well, that's okay because we have some questions.
Okay, great.
So if anyone's got any questions, now's the time to send them. But I can see we already have a fair few. So let's dive in. Back to the first one. Richard asks, where do you see micro learning fitting with micro credentialing?
And what do you mean by that exactly? That in terms of should you have a micro credential for micro learning? I think that
I think that's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think micro learning, I think the big misconception is that there's less information. I think it's really just about parsing out the information in a different way. You should not lose any of the information or of a course that you're taking. So I think that you should get a micro credential for that and be able to put it on your LinkedIn if you take a micro learning course. So yeah, I see it fitting in just as any e-learning course would fit in.
Awesome. I definitely agree. Let's have a look. Next one. John, was there a time when micro learning was intentionally used to sort of interest the learner to sort of bigger pieces of learning?
The thing is that the bigger pieces of learning we also do in micro learning. I think that we have leadership courses in microlearning. You could do a
Mm.
philosophy course in microlearning. So I don't know if it's throwing away bigger learning when we're doing it. I think that it's just splicing it out in different ways, and in a way, it can be a little bit more focused. Um, yeah. So absolutely. Another thing though too is if microlearning is used as, let's say, a refresher, or let's say someone from, I don't know why my head is in academia today, but let's say you're taking a philosophy course and we mentioned Kant. There should be a link that says if you want to learn more about Kant before anything, you can go and do that. And here's some resources to do it. That happens, and we definitely we source our material, so you can usually go check it out. If there's further reading, you can go ahead and do that. And I'm not sure the frequency that people actually do it. I think that they do, but I just don't have the numbers for that.
But that's about choice as well, right? I think that's one of the, I've always felt that was one of the big benefits of microlearning, was the fact that you're able to offer a lot more, as you say, more focused individual pieces, rather than saying you must sit through an hour, 40 minutes of which you couldn't care less about.
Yeah.
You can target the bits that you want within a syllabus rather than having to take the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Let's have a look. Oh, great question.
Oh
Can we
yeah.
get an example of a referential title and non-referential counterpart?
Yeah. So let's say, if the title for this was, uh, this is putting me on the spot, but let me see if I can think of something like, flexibility is strength. Keeping your, flexibility is strength. Microlearning in a world where there's no flexibility. That's a very like long title. But if it's something like, making your lessons agile, that's much shorter, to the point, and I can, when I'm scrolling, I know, oh, that's about agility. Or you would say something like lesson agility, even less than what I just said, lesson agility, something like that. Uh, Boring, something that you could, is really practical, that you could search through your courseware and go, oh, that's how you do that. For things like, sometimes we do construction courses for people that are manning forklifts, how to, you know, using or turning a forklift. That's very specific, and you're not going to have to wade through a whole forklift training to find the part about turning. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. Kind of less conceptual, more hyper specific.
Yeah.
Um, Awesome. That just that almost reminds me, almost like when you're setting up kind of SEO and search terms on a website. That kind of thought pattern. So that's quite interesting.
Exactly.
And then Richard again, do you think microlearning needs to be intentional, so that instructional designers build it, or can it be curated, such as YouTube videos?
That's a good question. I think it can be curated, like in terms of everyday life. I think that we, curate our intake, and if you need to fix some plumbing or something in your house and you're going to YouTube, you're curating your own little course in a way, and that is a type of microlearning. I'm proposing that is a type of microlearning. But for a workplace training, I think it would need to be intentional. Yeah, I think it would need to be intentional as a start. I mean, you can have a catalog of intentional micro learning courses and curate those. So there's going to be a bit of both. We have at EdApp, we have a free public library that we let everybody use. Most of the time, people people start to use it, and they might take out things and change things. So it's curated, but they're using some intentionality for their own specific needs, and then they deploy it. So it's a little bit of a mix of both. It doesn't
Awesome.
need to be one way or the other. Yeah.
And we've just had another one come in. What would you put the most emphasis on these 8 to 12 slides? Theory, practice, experience, or reflection?
That's a good question. I would say, if you could do a couple slides of each of those, that'd be amazing. Hitting all of those. I think theory, I do not believe in throwing away theory completely. I think that theory is what grounds people and to make choices later in life, and to make practical choices. And it also gives the reason of why you're learning the thing in the first place. So I think theory is important in those ways. Now, should we elaborate on theory and make it a big part of the lesson? Probably not. We should probably keep it to a slide or so, but enough, just a little bit, and really get to the practical applications. And if you have a mechanism for experience and reflection, use it, use it. I think that's those are really, really important. It's just not possible with everybody's tools that they're using. That's what I would say. Practice is the most important, but experience and reflection is almost equal if you can do it. So yeah, just depends on what you can do.
Awesome. Two more. We've got questions flying in now. We've got the ball rolling. Is there any evidence whether photographic versus animated content impacts on effectiveness or relatableness? We don't think that's a word. That's fine. We'll make up words. We're going to make up words all day. That's now the challenge.
There's two things for this. I mean, I am not a scientist, but I can tell you anecdotally what I found. And I found that depending on the age group, and I think, animated content is going to be relatable and sometimes not relatable at all. And sometimes it's very just a reminder of this is a module that you're taking. But and it also takes a long time to do. So what I prefer to do is to have real photographs and people. And it also allows me to have a diverse cast of people in my lessons. I personally, this is my preference. I don't really do the character that walks you through the lesson. Not knocking that. It's just something that I don't usually do because I think it takes a long time for me, and I have to make a lot of courseware, like every single day. So I go to Pexels and I find some cool looking people. I usually opt for diversity all of the time because it's important, I believe, for people to see themselves in the learning and for them to start to relate to it even subconsciously. So I go for photographs. It's easier. If it's a good photograph already, I don't need to change any colors or move stuff around. And I think it's also very relatable.
Awesome. Good stuff. And then the last one, the most important question of all, YouTube Shorts or TikTok?
I would say in terms of education, YouTube Shorts is a little bit better, but I think the algorithm in YouTube of related videos is detrimental to humanity. This is my perspective here. Don't speak for my company or anything else. I think it's bad. I actually have a plugin on my Chrome that that blocks related videos. I suggest everybody get it, and it really keeps your focus on the video that you're going into, and you're not going to be there forever. Now, TikTok, you do one TikTok and you are there for hours. I've looked up from TikTok and it's been it's been nighttime. So I'm weary of it. It's just because I think our brains are vulnerable to it. It's too micro.
Yeah. There's no challenge, is there? There's no attention at all required for a TikTok.
And also just on my, this is my own opinions. These are all my own opinions. I was reading in the New York Times, just the idea that the videos that have facial recognition for smiles get on your feed more than ones that don't, I find very problematic for humanity and kind of the human condition. So that's my 2 cents on those. So I guess YouTube Shorts with a Chrome extension to block related videos.
Excellent. Good stuff. Right. Oh, we've got a couple more messages. Just checking any of them are questions. Making up words. Yep. So we've got lots of thumbs up for making up words because people are in different time zones. I agree. That will help a lot. I always come up with the most imaginative vocabulary when I'm half asleep. But those are all the questions. So thank you so much for this session. I thought it was really, really interesting. I know there's a kind of space on LinkedIn that you
Oh
have
yeah.
for people to check things out.
Yeah, I would ask everybody to come join Train On. It's called. It's one word, Train with a capital O-N. It's a LinkedIn group that I run with EdApp, my company, or not my company, the company I'm a part of. But it's great. There's 1,400, almost 1,400 L&D people in there, and it's very, very different than other groups that are really just all advertising. A lot of stuff is happening in it, where we have workshops where if you're a member, you can join the workshop for free, create courseware for nonprofits, create something for your portfolio. And we're going to be launching just workshops that people can attend and bring their work and get critique from other IDs in the group. So it's a lot of exciting things are happening in it, and we have a registration open now to help two organizations that you can read more about on Train On. So Train On LinkedIn group, please join. I will accept your request immediately.
Yeah, and I think it is different to other groups. I really like it, and I think it's useful for everyone, but especially if you are looking to build up those initial skills, get some experience, and get an opportunity to build stuff, get into it and do it, and say either build portfolios or build for good causes. Those things are often difficult to find. So
Absolutely.
go check it out.
And just a plug for the company I'm in, my company, EdApp, great authoring tool, template based, mobile first, microlearning, and it's very, very easy to use. It's also an LMS, and they're tied together. All right, thank you. This has been fun. I
Awesome.
know it went over a little bit.
No, I think that's great. We had loads of questions, so that makes sense to stay. Well, coming up in just under 20 minutes, we have Kate from Seven Taps continuing the micro learning theme. So until then, we will bid you adieu
All
and
right.
catch you all shortly.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.